With extracts from his own diary tapes and other unique recordings, former Cabinet Minister Tony Benn describes his constituency work as a Member of Parliament.
Like every MP, my first responsibility is to work for the people who elect me and to keep in the closest touch with the local party who chose me to be their candidate. These aspects of political life and work are hardly ever mentioned, although they are the lifeblood of democracy. All MPs, including, I might add, cabinet ministers, receive constituency letters every day with problems of all kinds that have to be dealt with. And others come up at the weekly advice service or surgery, which often lasts for hours and can be very exhausting. But as well as trying to help those who come, there are always important lessons to be learned about what's really going on. And from experience gained in this way, you realise the need for policy changes for the future.
I just overslept. I had my weekend lie-in at the hotel, in effect, and I didn't wake up till 10:15. And I'm dictating this on the 11:10 train to London. I must say, surgeries are amazing experiences because they do bring you absolutely up against the harshest part of life. I give one example. A woman of 70, I would think, with a widow's pension, had decided about a year ago that she would take into her house a disabled man and befriended him. The local Department of Health and Social Security stopped her widow's pension on the grounds that they were cohabiting. She appealed to the tribunal for the restoration of her widow's pension. And she said that the head of the tribunal asked her whether they were having sexual intercourse, and she broke down and wept because she said it was so shameful that such a question should be asked. And of course, having met the couple together and seen her, it was an absurd idea. They have separate rooms and so on, but even if they were, what on earth's that got to do with her entitlement to a widow's pension? Anyway, I said I would write to the DHSS, and I dropped these things down because politics isn't only about the major arguments, it is about other things as well. Saturday the 30th of July, 77, I went to the YMCA at Totterdown this morning for my surgery at 9 o'clock, and from 9 till 2:30, that was 5.5 hours without a break for lunch or anything, my surgery went on, an amazing surgery. There were people who complained about late-night cafes, about the Hells Angels. There were parents from a Catholic school whose headmaster had been suspended on the grounds that the Avon Education Committee thought he was mad and wanted him to see a psychiatrist. Huge group of parents. There was an old man of 82 who came in and took down his trousers and made me examine the shrapnel wound in his hip that he'd got in 1916. There was an inventor with a new type of roof apparatus. There was a woman who wanted her child to go to a certain school, and I worked and worked and worked. And finally, at 2:30, quite exhausted, I went and had a meal with Maurice Ray, went to the station, and slept all the way back to London, and my holiday has officially begun today.
But apart from this personal casework, there are, of course, the regular political discussions with the individual members of the local party, with ward parties, and the General Management Committee, which they elect. These are active and committed men and women who get nothing out of it for themselves, do all the hard work in elections, and expect that their MP will report to them and listen to their criticisms, which are usually direct and shrewd. This criticism, coming mainly from the left, reached a peak for me as MP for Bristol South East in 1976, when the Labour government was very unpopular for its cuts in public expenditure, and there were those who believed that I should resign from the cabinet and lead the opposition from outside.
Friday, the 23rd of July, 1976. I overslept again this morning till 9 o'clock, and I'm dictating this on the train. And I must say, unless I get some more sleep in, I'm going to be no use to anybody over the next week or two. I went and did my surgery. It was in an old rambling vicarage in Windmill Hill, with an absolute succession of the usual tragic cases of people, all of whom could only be helped by higher public expenditure. And I felt very, as I always do, very exposed to the reality of life as compared to sitting in the cabinet and trading off cuts to please the bankers, and it's no basis whatever for a Labour government. Then I was taken off to the GMC, and Cyril Langham was in the chair, and Herbert Rogers was there, and I went right back over the manifesto and the shift in 1974 and 75 after the referendum, and then I described the cuts and the pressures and the fight in the cabinet, and said that it had been defeated, but I felt it was right to stay in and fight. Let me tell you the factors in my mind, and then you tell me whether you think I'm right or not. Now, there's no point in coming out of the cabinet unless you vote against the measures. If you vote against the measures, the government falls 3 weeks from now. The trade unions would then be faced by Mrs. Thatcher. More people are thrown out of work. You have 2 million unemployed. And no point saying you didn't mean it to happen like that. You contributed to it happening like that. I mean, I think about this every day. I really would like to know what the local party think about it. Well, when I sat down, there was an absolutely universal mass criticism of the cuts. Brian Beckingham predictably came out and said that what was needed was leadership. A young guy called Jim, who was a shop steward with the dustman in Bristol, said that people said, "Where's your Tony Benn now?" And Bob Glendinning, who is... well, he's an old left-wing doctor who was pro-common market, which slightly shocked me. He said, "I'm not in the Labour Party to see the whole thing destroyed." And there was a tremendous attack. I mean, there wasn't anybody who could say a good word for it.
Accepts the 4.5% pay policy. In fact, I've yet to receive my £6 from last year. I haven't got that yet. So when I get 4.5%, I'm beginning to wonder whether it'll be 2% or nothing at all. I've had members of my union come up to me and say, "Where's your Tony Benn now? Why is he not arguing on the basis of the policies that were put forward by the Labour Party in the manifesto by conference decisions, which are quite clearly in opposition?"
Well, at about 9:15, Cyril said, "Well, Tony should sum up." And people said, "Oh, no, we want more discussion." Well, I said, I'm in no hurry at all. I haven't been to bed for 2 weeks, so I'm quite happy to go on tonight. I think probably the right thing is to leave it now, remain in, certainly until after the TUC Congress, and maybe until the eve of the Labour Party conference, and see what happens there. But there is no doubt of the extreme depth of the bitterness, the hostility, the sense of betrayal among our party people. I did not actually get a vote on whether I should stay in or not, because I didn't particularly want that. But Jack Watson, whose judgment I trust very much indeed, said, "You stay in there." Mrs. Berry, who's about 85 and a remarkable woman, said it would be the coward's way out to resign. And what they're moving towards is the idea that I should speak my mind and then be sacked. And I don't like that as a way of doing it, and I don't want to provoke it deliberately. But if Jim feels that he wants to get rid of me, he must take responsibility for doing that. That was the end of Friday, the 23rd of July, 1976.
Apart from the strictly political work, an MP is also expected to turn up on formal civic occasions as a public representative of the whole community. This is when you see the establishment on parade, and the class structure stands out almost as if democracy did not exist.
Sunday the 11th of November 1979, I walked to the council house for the cenotaph service wearing my 4 medals. Reasons for doing it, partly because I think it's very important that people should remember the war and the need for peace, should be reminded of who we were fighting in the war, because it's also important to be there, and with your medals no one can say you're a traitor, and because I'm the senior member of Parliament for the city. And I marched with Michael Cox and William Waldegrave to the cenotaph, and there was all that ritual again, you see, the white Jaguar, I think, with the police chief in front, then the Lord Mayor's coach with a police escort of mounted police with plumes, which remind you of Peterloo, then the Sir John Wills, the big industrialist, who's the Lord Lieutenant, or I think the 3 deputy lieutenants in top hats, looking really like a cartoon of a 19th century funeral party, then some officers representing the heads of the services in or near Bristol, and I stood at the head of the line at the cenotaph. And one thing that strikes me is that this is really the establishment remembering the war. For example, the wreaths that are laid by the officers. A member of the working class, i.e. a non-commissioned officer, comes up and salutes and hands the wreath to the officer, who lays it on the cenotaph in memory of the overwhelming majority of working class people who were killed. But the working class are, even on the occasion of the commemoration of the dead, only servants of the upper classes. And there are all these officers, all these troops, all this ritual, all this symbol of past authority. And somehow now the Tories are in power, they look much stronger than they did. In the old days they were just a sort of ritual. Now that Thatcher's there, you feel that's real power has come back again. It's no longer a tourist attraction, it's real power. And the whole thing is really very strange to watch.
No picture of constituency life would be complete without mentioning the moments of candour when things are said that put you in your place. The old stalwarts are often those who speak most bluntly, and on one occasion I was severely rebuked myself.
Monday the 5th of January, I went down to Bristol, specially to present a clock to Bill Isaac, who has retired as Secretary of St George East Ward, a job he's held since 1956, and he himself is 80 this year. Now, Bill is one of the old boys, and he's hung on as long as he could, and I rang him up and got his life story. He came from Wales in 1914, joined the General Workers' Union in 1917, devoted much of his life to the trade union movement, became vice president of his branch, was active in the Labour Party from 1920 onwards and knew Herbert Rogers very well and so on. And I thought it'd be nice to go down and do it. And I went down, got to the party club and headquarters about 7:15, and there were about 25 people gathered, and Harold Tow, who's the chairman of the ward, asked me to say a word, so I repeated this history, and Bill kept interrupting me while I was telling his own story. Then he made a speech, and he said, well, thanks for the clock. My house is full of them. That'll do for one in the lavatory. And then when I presented a bouquet of flowers to his wife, Frida, his second wife, he said, oh, well, put those in my bedroom. And the thing was so aggressive. And then he talked about the councillors in the old days and how marvellous they were. Unlike the councillors we have today, you never see, he said, pointing at Pete Hammond, who was one of the Young Socialist militant group. And Pete just sat there, flushing slightly and looking down. And then I, to round it all off, said, well, Bill, there you are. At 80, your job is to encourage younger people like Fenner Brockway and Phil Noel Baker and so on. And he then chipped in and said, well, my advice to you, Tony, is to pipe down. People don't know what you're saying. They say you're a communist and a Marxist, and pipe down. They don't know what you're up to. What are you up to anyway? Well, since I'd come all the way down to say this to him, I must say I was kind of fed up. So I said, well, Herbert Morrison was a Marxist, Stafford Cripps was a Marxist, and so on, and I left it at that. But he's an aggressive man. I was fed up, truthfully. So I slipped away, caught the train home.
In fact, Pete Hammond, who was attacked by Bill Isaac, was the same man who took the case of the couple accused of cohabitation to a tribunal and won it for them. My experiences as a constituency MP have had a far greater influence on my thinking than the speeches I've heard in the Commons or the articles and broadcasts by political correspondents.